Okay, let me start by wishing everyone a warm welcome to this session. I think there are still people joining as I speak, so I'll speak very slowly in these opening introductory remarks so that we get more people into the room before we really get going on the substance. My name is Michael Keenan. I'm coming from the OECD Secretariat here in Paris. And what I'm going to talk about today, and what colleagues here are going to talk about, is an infrastructure called STIP Compass, which is built by the OECD and the European Commission. Perhaps you could show my slides, please. So, what the session, the title of the session is whether STIP Compass, which has been around now for a few years, is an infrastructure that's fit to inform transformative innovation policy. Next slide, please. And it concerns specifically whether it can support policymaking and analysts as they seek to promote transformative innovation policy agendas. So with that in mind, the session, which is organized in a rather traditional way of 4 presentations and a Q&A afterwards, begins with me introducing STIP Compass, what it's about, why we built it, the sorts of features that it has, the types of data you can obtain from the system. And then I'll invite 2 perspectives from quite different countries. So we'll first get a policy perspective from Portugal, from Tiago Santos Pereira, from a university, but who's also a delegate to one of our committees in the OECD. So he's also wearing a sort of policy hat. And then from a non-OECD member country, from Thailand, we have from Priya Lundberg, who's from the Thailand Office of National Higher Education. And she's also a delegate to the OECD as well, to the Committee of Science, Technology, Policy, the delegate for Thailand. And of course, she'll also be wearing that policy perspective hat. And then finally, we have an analyst perspective hat from an academic, from David Hovolt, who's based at Fraunhofer in Germany. And he'll tell us his views on how STIP Compass data can be used by policy analysts, and in particular to answer questions around transformative innovation policy analyses and agendas. And as I said at the outset, the formats will be PowerPoint presentations, first with me, and then followed by Tiago, then from Priya, then David, and then we'll open the floor up to the audience for questions and answers. And you'll see there that big URL at the bottom for those of you who haven't visited the STIP Compass platform previously. Then just type in stip.oecd.org, and you can explore what's there while we're presenting. Next slide, please. So just to give you an introduction of STIP Compass, as I mentioned, this is a joint initiative between the European Commission and the OECD, and it aims to collect together in one place lots of data about national STI policies. And currently we have around 6,500 policies in there, which are characterized against various types of taxonomies. But we not only have policy data in there, we also combine that policy data with other types of data, so on publications, with our statistics as well. So it's really trying to build one place, one hub, where we have all of this data together. And one of the key things is that it provides also a harmonized repository of information. So the policy data that we collect on those 6,500 policies is harmonized. It's using standard taxonomies across countries and across time. And the data is open, so anyone can download the full data set, do their own analysis. There are around 1,000 dashboards that you can play with as well on the platform itself. So all publicly available, and covering currently around 60 countries in the world. The most recent survey that we did last year, 57 countries participated. And how is all this possible? Well, it uses semantic technologies to store various types of information, then to make it accessible and to link various different types of data together. So the policy data is linked to statistics, to publications, to tweets as well. And taxonomies, of course, lie at the heart of this to enable these semantic features. And then on the traffic to the site, in the last year, we had about 150,000 unique visits to the site. Next slide. So the main data source for the platform is this survey and monitor tool that we have, which is also built using semantic technologies. We run the survey every 2 years, but it's open in between those 2-year periods for countries to update their data as well. And it's targeted at countries to provide us with information on their national STI policy initiatives. So we have a national contact point in each country. The survey goes to them, and then they distribute it across different ministries and funding agencies. These national contact points are coming either from the Committee for Scientific and Technological Policy of the OECD or from the European Union's Iraq Committee. And then because all of this is embedded inside the Commission and inside the OECD, it does provide unique access to national STI policymakers that would be difficult to emulate elsewhere. So if you're coming from an academic world, this would be quite difficult to build something like this. So that does mean that that the OECD and the European Union kind of sit in a unique niche here to collect this data. Currently, there are around 1,700 government officials registered to complete the survey and to update their data in a monitoring tool. And as I mentioned earlier, 57 countries and the European Commission answered the 2021 edition of the survey. Next slide, please. So what sort of data do we collect, and what scope is the data, how many questions and the like? Well, it has 50 questions divided into 6 main policy areas, and we also tend to have 2 edition-specific modules. And the taxonomies we use, they embody what I would describe as a broadly accepted descriptive model of the STI policy field. And this is something which we might open up and debate later on in the discussion. So it covers public R&D, business R&D and innovation, collaboration and co-creation, human resources for STI, STI for societal challenges, and STI policy governance arrangements. So these are all the sort of classical type of lenses that we often bring to mapping national systems of innovation. They also include descriptions of more than 25 types of policy instruments and around 30 different types of policy target groups as well. And these taxonomies have remained relatively stable since 2017 when they were first formulated. Next slide. So, we have this data coming in through the survey. We're mixing it up with statistics, with other sorts of data as well, including publications. And then all of this is presented through various different formats in the platform itself. So we have these interactive dashboards. So there's around 1,000 of these now, covering many different entry points, if you like. So you can see a dashboard on different types of target groups that are targeted by STI policies, or look at different types of policy instrument use. And of course, you can come in at the country level as well and have a look at the policy mix that countries have. Next slide. So this is an example here of a country, a dashboard. Next slide. And then you can also generate PDFs that capture this information and provide it in a portable format. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Yeah, and then in addition to these interactive dashboards, you can also just explore the data using a sort of Google-like search, and then you can also refine that search using keywords that also depend upon taxonomies. Next slide. And then if you want to download the data, the whole set, or you only want to download sections of the data, you can also use this query builder. There's an open API on the data set, so you can also, as the data is updated, you can also, if you've got your own knowledge management system, you can also import the data from the system. It's available in these CSV and XML formats. Next slide. And also, because it can be a little bit overwhelming when you arrive at all these dashboards and the Explorer and the like. So we've also are building different thematic portals and also things which we call decision support tools on particular topics, which kind of bring you on journeys through the data. So we have, for example, decision support tools on mission-oriented innovation policy and on knowledge transfer policy. Next slide. So if we're looking at transformative innovation policy, well, how can this portal be leveraged to help agenda setting analyses around transformative innovation policy? Well, first to say that analysts can already use the existing platform, of course, to investigate any STI policy research questions that they have. And those also include transformative innovation policy related questions. For example, you can already leverage the taxonomies within STIP Compass to investigate societal target groups in the way that they're targeted with STI policies, participatory policy practices, cross-government coordination mechanisms, and so on and so forth. And topics like these are already well covered, as I say, in the taxonomy, particularly in the section on STI policy and societal challenges. And this is data on also things like mission-oriented policies, STI policies for achieving net zero, and so on. Next slide. But our future development options possible, needed, with a focus on transformative innovation policy. And this is what we're going to hear from the two policymakers in a minute, and from the academic analyst. But let me just put an OECD view on this. I think it could be possible to extend and deepen data coverage of specific sectors or challenges that relate to transformative innovation policy. And we could leverage the wide network of respondents that are already engaged across governments of 1,700 people to help do that. Because as we know, a lot of transformative innovation policy is actually embedded in sectors or in particular challenges. We could also assess the emergence and fit of transformative innovation policy vis-a-vis other STI policies in the wider STI ecosystem. And I know David's done some work on that and can perhaps tell you more about that. And we could also develop web services directed at policymakers, so new interactive dashboards that explicitly provide evidence and guidance on transformative innovation policy agendas and practices. And I'm sure there are many other things we could do, so I put some question marks there. And we'll hopefully get some ideas today. Next slide. So this is my final slide. So this is some of the issues for consideration that, that colleagues are going to talk to in their presentations in a moment. They're first going to start, at least from Priora and Tiago, will talk about the state of play of transformative innovation policy agendas within their countries and the main challenges that they face, for example, when it comes to collecting or referring to reference baseline data that informs policy. And then secondly, how STIP Compass is currently used in policymaking in their countries and by whom and how this could evolve to better support the transformative innovation policy agenda. And finally, any additional or alternative data and or features in STIP Compass that could make it more fit to contribute to transformative innovation policy agendas. So that's all from me for now. And so I will stop and I will pass the floor to Tiago, who will give us that policy perspective from Portugal. Thank you very much for your attention.
Apologies, I got mixed here with them. Okay, hello, good afternoon or good morning to all, depending on where you are. So my name is Tiago Santos Pereira. I'm here both mainly as in a policy condition, as I am an academic at the Center for Social Studies at the University of Coimbra, but I have always been for a number of years the Portuguese national delegate to the Committee on Science and Technology Policy of the OECD, also following a period of positioning at the National Research Council, where I follow the OECD matters. And so I've been also an actor here, both in terms of discussing the development of the STIP Compass platform, but also as responsible at some point in the process of inputting national data onto the platform. And so, as Michael mentioned, I'm here both to discuss briefly a view on transformative innovation policy in Portugal, as well as to discuss how the STIP Compass platform itself can be useful from a policy perspective, and giving just two brief examples. On a transformative innovation policy in Portugal, I should say that the main point is that this is a vocabulary that is a vocabulary, and of course not just a vocabulary, but also a policy approach that is starting to be approached or engaged with in the Portuguese system, although it still follows very much kind of discourse more linked to innovation systems approach. Nevertheless, I think that the recent dynamics following the pandemic crisis have made it more evident in recent policy options, and namely following the pandemic crisis. As you know, at the European level, there has been a wide EU level programs with, of course, national dimensions on a program for recovery and resilience. And this somehow embeds much of a discourse in terms of transformation with these three main dimensions of policy objectives, targeting resilience, targeting climate transition, and targeting digital transition. And so in that sense, the transformation has been much more understood, at least in terms of vocabulary, through the notion of transition. And talking about the double transitions has been more dominant in terms of the recent policy discourse. This somehow follows a prior phase where SDGs were particularly relevant in terms of how to understand or how to engage with a transformative dimension within science, technology, innovation policy. And so thinking about how STI policy could contribute to address SDGs, so the Sustainable Development Goals, was the main way through which a transformative mode of thinking about innovation policy was started to be embedded within the policy frame in Portugal. The Recovery and Resilience Program has a parallel with another agenda, which is quite central to the wider horizontal policies in Portugal, also in the STI domain, which is related to the structural funds in partnership with Europe, which is called the Portugal 2030 agenda, which has these objectives in terms of people first, innovation, digitalization, qualification, the climate transition, sustainability of resources, and the external competitiveness and internal cohesion. And I'll focus here briefly on the innovation, digitalization, and qualification dimension, of course, noting that innovation is relatively horizontal to the different objectives, and also noting the importance of people as a horizontal objective in terms of the qualification of the Portuguese society, which is quite central to the whole program objective. And so if you look particularly, if you look particularly at the innovation, digitalization, qualification objective, these principles are quite central: openness to innovation, and with these different dimensions, which are becoming somehow have some newness to the policy initiatives, and somehow I believe reflect a transformative agenda in themselves. For example, the way that pilot projects have become more considered as an instrument for the wider program, a focus on territorial approaches, and so not just in terms of a kind of a centralized view that could then kind of trickle down impacts, but working more at local dimensions. And also the way that innovation is quite central to different objectives I've already mentioned. So it's quite central to the green agenda, digital agenda, the social agenda, and the competitiveness agenda. And so somehow innovation does embed some of the transformative vocabulary. And again, collaboration is quite central in this transformative dimension in engaging the different actors. I have here these different objectives on the innovation, digitalization, qualification, which I'll go through. I'll leave it to you, but just highlight also the human resources dimension. So coming to the STIP Compass, Portugal, as different countries, also has its own dashboard here with 251 policy initiatives, and has had this, of course, the STIP Compass also from a policy perspective is also important as a easier door of information on our system worldwide. And we see here the access to the Portuguese dashboard at the STIP Compass, so throughout the world. I also would like to highlight kind of both the roles that STIP Compass is a platform to provide information, but it also requires the work of collecting and consolidating the information. So this kind of back office part, I think it's also important in this process. And here highlighting the different organizations that are reflected in the initiatives that are introduced in the Portuguese national dashboard. And I think one point is that it makes visible the heterogeneity of the system, which is not necessarily always the first view that you have on the system. Although here the Foundation for Science and Technology has a particular prominent role, there is a much wider set of organizations, and all these engage in the process of providing the information for the STIP Compass, which I think it's an important process because, for example, when I have an active role on that, we engaged with organizations with whom we did not so frequently engage in different sectors. I'll go through this, but just to note that this was an exercise we've done looking at human resources policies. You might recall here I mentioned people first, and this has been a long-standing priority within the STI policy agenda in Portugal. And looking at the information at the STIP Compass is also a way to learn about different initiatives in different countries and how these are reflected among the different categories that are the different taxonomies that the STIP Compass engages with. Also to note that STIP Compass also has typically open questions for the main topics, and through that you can also understand how the different dimensions are identified in public debates, here in particular case of human resources policies. In Portuguese case, just to highlight that research and innovation for society is among the main themes of the STIP policy initiatives that have been entered. And again, looking at the wider theme areas of the whole initiatives from all the countries, we have here the research and innovation for society as one of the themes, and which is not among the top, but I'll focus on this in the next slides. Here I look at both the research and innovation for society and the innovation in firms themes that somehow encapsulate different frames, if you think in terms of the innovation systems approach and the transformative innovation approach. The research and innovation for society somehow could be considered to encapsulate the more kind of transformative objectives. And looking here in Portugal, we do have a higher number of research and innovation for society initiatives. So this is just looking at the number of initiatives and not exactly at the content. And here a ratio between the two. Actually, this is research and innovation for society over innovation in firms. And so for example, Portugal is one of the countries that has a higher ratio of research and innovation for society versus innovation in firms. So to some extent, a question I could leave is whether does this reflect that the policy frame, a transformative policy frame, is more dominant in the Portuguese case. Looking specifically at the research and innovation for society initiatives versus the STIP initiatives and the type of instruments, for example, we can look throughout the STIP Compass. And for example, looking at that, I found that the governance initiatives seem to be central in the research and innovation for society theme, as compared to the overall STIP initiatives. It is also central, but it is not as central. And for example, the direct financial support seems to be less central in this dimension. And so just to finalize that in Portugal, the transformation is very much encapsulated, the transformation dimension and the transition under the SDGs. Collaboration is quite central. Here, an emphasis on research and innovation for society is reflected in the national STI policy initiatives in the STIP Compass. And thinking STIP Compass as a learning tool, I would like to highlight this kind of back office dimension that it makes the different organizations also know about different initiatives and articulate the different initiatives. I note in the information maybe a lack of concrete evaluative information there is a space for that, but there is little information from the countries. And I think that STIP Compass also reflects the heterogeneity. It is also a window for countries to focus on specific areas and understand how those areas and themes and priorities or types of initiatives are also addressed in different countries. So it is also, in that sense, it is also a window to induce transformation. Thanks.
Okay, thank you
for discussion.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tiago. Without further ado, Priya, do you want to take the floor, please?
Yes, of course. Just please allow me to share my screen. Okay, can you all see my screen now? So just like Tiago, I am also a national delegate for Thailand for the CSTP Committee of Scientific and Technological Policy. And I am also a national contact point for the STIP Compass. So I have an experience as the one who input the policy initiatives in the database, and also at the same time as a policymakers using the STIP Compass. So my view will be as a policymakers from a non-OECD member country, because Thailand hasn't become the member country yet. The STIP Compass has actually helped us in working on the transformative policy agenda. We have a national model called the BCG model. BCG, most people outside Thailand probably know BCG as a Boston consultancy group, but in Thailand and ASEAN, we promote BCG as a bioeconomy, circular economy, and green economy model, combining all three aspects together. The bioeconomy focuses on different utilization of natural resources, along with natural balance protection by using technological advancement in disciplinary fields to increase efficiency and innovation. For circular economy is an economic system that all resources can be restored and reutilized to avoid resource scarcity. So for green economy, a related concept is an economic development model that concerns balanced development between economy, society, and environment. So all these three aspects are related. It serves as an important contribution to the long-term Thailand national strategy, which spans over 20 years, starting in 2017 until 2036. And it also answers 9 goals of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. In the national level, we have set up the committee to address the model, having the Prime Minister chairing the executive board. And under the executive board committee, we have a national BCG driving committee chaired by the Minister of Higher Education, Science, and Research and Innovation, which is my line ministry. We are the policy office under this ministry. So we are one of the main driver of the BCG model. As you can see here, the BCG model spans across 11 sectors, ranging from law, tourism, agriculture, biodiversity, food, medical devices, human development, innovation and infrastructure, energy, material and chemical biology sector, medicine and vaccine, and also circular economy sector. It is a very, very cross-cutting issue involving pretty much almost all ministries in Thailand. This means that the level of collaboration is very important to achieve the common goal. In November 2022, or later this year, Thailand will be the host for Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit. We are going to announce the Bangkok Goals on BCG, which have the aims on targeting zero emission, zero waste, preservation and conservation of environment, increased use of science, technology, and innovation, and also digitalization, and also focus on social inclusion and human resource development. So the BCG will help us to reach this goal and also answer the key priority of APEC to facilitate trade and investment, to reboot regional connectivity within APEC region, and to advance sustainable and inclusive growth. Coming to Thailand's country dashboard on STIP Compass. So here is an overview of Thailand's contribution in the STIP Compass. There are in total 96 policy initiatives. And in 2021, this is the statistics that we got from the OECD. There are 340 page views in the whole year, with average time spent on Thailand page almost 4 minutes. This is the average number, so that means that it includes people like me, like the NCP or the policymakers, that maybe we spend like 2 hours on the page. And at the same time, there might be also those who spend 1 minute or even less than a minute. So it reflects that those who come to visit Thailand's country dashboard on the STIP Compass doesn't really spend so much time on it, but more likely that they look at the overview, maybe the number of initiatives, or compare some of our indicators with their countries. Looking at the page views the page view of our dashboard, 20% approximately are from within Thailand. So 1/5 of the visits is from within our country, and 80% are from outside Thailand. How do we use STIP Compass here in Thailand? I cannot really say for other countries, but I can only say that as a policymaker, we used it to collect our national policy data in one place. It's a very convenient place for us to just focus on this one single database and input all the policy initiatives that we have. It also allows us to sort policy initiatives according to thematic areas, but the thematic areas are not decided by us. It's decided, predetermined by the OECD, which means that it might not correspond to our national policy agenda. But so far, it has really helped us to sort our policy initiatives and also see what is important policy agenda in the international level. It also facilitates coordination in terms of data sharing, both within our ministry and also outside our ministry. This might be a bit unique advantage for Thailand, because in Thailand, we have just merged the higher education and the funding part from Ministry of Education to the former Ministry of Science and Technology. So it becomes a large ministry called Ministry of Higher Education, Science, Research and Innovation. A very long name, I must admit. And also it means it also a very big ministry that we do not know all the policies that other offices are working, but this is a good place for us to share the initiatives. And it also allows us to work with other ministry, for example, with Ministry of Agriculture that has an office in innovation for agriculture. Another advantage for using STIP Compass for us is an obvious increased stability of our policy initiatives, because the database is accessible by all and it's also in English. Not most of the policy agenda in Thailand are in Thai. I think that's probably the same with many other countries, that most policy initiatives are in local language. So we do not translate all of our policy initiatives to English and put into the OECD database. We translate those that we think are the key initiatives. And it makes it easier for other countries to find our initiatives. And some of the initiatives actually target foreigners so that they know our innovation policy and they are interested to invest in our country. It also allows us to compare and to benchmark key indicators against other countries. And we also use it to get understanding about other countries' STI policy structure, particularly when we are about to have new collaboration, or when we have courtesy call from ambassadors visiting ministers. We usually use a STIP Compass to check overview of the policy structure of that country, because it's a convenient single source of information. There is a particular platform or particular feature of the STIP Compass that we think that is very important, and we haven't contributed to this platform yet, but we will in the future. It really corresponds to our target to be carbon neutrality and also aiming for net zero emissions by 2065. The Prime Minister of Thailand has just pledged during the last COP conference in the end of last year, that we will become carbon neutrality in 2050. And to reach this target, that means that it involves several sectors, and it means that the government really has to realign their priority to focus on environment, not anymore as a second priority, but now as the first priority. So here are some examples of the mitigation measures that we are working on. As you can see, it spans from energy and transportation, and also the production and process, agriculture, forest and land use, and also waste. This makes the STI policy for net zero platform on STIP Compass become more relevant for us, because it combines and gathers thematic data for energy and STI policy contributions from other countries, and provide insights on initiatives that contribute to reaching the net zero goal. So I believe that in other countries, this platform is also cross-cutting policy initiatives. I do not know how many initiatives I do not know the percentage of policy initiatives that other countries put into this platform compared to the total initiatives that they have contributing policy for net zero. But in total, there are 249 policy initiatives from 41 territories. When I have checked, in some countries, there are like 2 or 3 initiatives only, and some countries enter like 20. So I think that maybe just like Thailand, we focus more on the policy that we think is the important one that we would like to highlight. But anyway, this is a very good platform to look at other countries' policies for net zero. And this is my last slide. STIP Compass has already contributed greatly to policy transformation and to policy making process as well. But we believe that there are some rooms for improvement. And here are our wish list from the policy maker's perspective. The visibility of the input in the database could have been better in the search engines. For example, when we enter the name of the initiatives in Google or in other search engines, STIP Compass is not on the first or second page. So it's a bit difficult to find this policy initiative in the STIP Compass. And policy initiatives in Thailand, we do not necessarily have English names for those initiatives, but we translate them particularly so that we can input them in the STIP Compass. So if the STIP Compass offer multiple language compatibility for the names of initiatives, it would probably increase the value and also more hits when people search on the search engines. There is already comparison features on STIP Compass. I can compare Thailand and other countries, but it would be great if it's possible to compare a group of countries. So for example, if I'm interested in comparing Germany, France, Switzerland together with Thailand, there is no function to get an average number of those compared to Thailand. So comparison features as a group of countries could be interesting. And short country overview and also thematic overview would also be very, very valuable. Right now, there is country overview, but those country overviews are written by the country delegates themselves. That means that we provide the overview of the aspects that we would like to market or to showcase in international platform. But if it would have been written by the third party or by the OECD, then it would provide a fairer overview of the countries, and it would also give. It would also make it easier for the visitors to understand the overview of the country. This goes also from the thematic overview of each theme that the OECD focus on. For example, on ocean, on net zero, there is no thematic overview. If there would be like a summary of the global trends, here I put up as an example of some overview of each country to highlight the most important initiatives of each country to achieve the green recovery. It would be more attractive for visitors to look into. And it would be great if the STIP Compass would be a bit more intuitive and have some more infographic so that it will be easier to use. But as I said, STIP Compass is already a great contribution for policymaking process, but this is just some wish list from us as policymakers. Thank you.
Many thanks from Priya, particularly for those recommendations and also giving us insights on how you're using STIP Compass in the Thai government. Okay, we're running quite low on time, so let me hand over to David now, who'll give us an academic perspective. Over to you, David.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Let me share my screen. This is, now this should work. So I try to be brief in my presentation. Thanks very much for the opportunity to join this panel. So I will briefly say what I think is the most interesting aspects of the STIP Compass when studying transformative innovation policy. Then I will briefly talk about some possible ways of conducting analysis of transformative innovation policy, and then I will maybe finish with some reflections if time permits. So what aspects are most interesting when we are interested in transformative innovation policy? As you know, the STIP Compass comprises a questionnaire of 50 questions, and I think 4 questions are specifically directed at these 4 different kinds of policy initiatives. And here you see how many of those initiatives we have in the data set. So this is maybe where one would start looking for transformative innovation policy. And I think it's worth mentioning that in previous edition of the surveys, these questions have in part varied slightly. So one could say that there is a certain dynamic to how the survey captures transformative innovation policy. Now, how could we study transformative innovation policy? In fact, the STIP Compass makes it possible to analyze innovation policy at different levels of granularity. And of course, most of us are probably interested in policy initiatives. That's the main unit of analysis of the STIP Compass. And that's where the data is most easily accessible. But both in the policy studies community and I think also in policymaking circles, the policy mix perspective becomes increasingly more important. So the idea is that we should focus on several initiatives, compare them and see how they possibly interact in order to understand the outcomes of innovation policy. So that's another perspective. And then third perspective would be to look at transformative innovation policy in the context of national innovation policy mixes. So I spelled this out here a little bit. We could either focus on the building blocks of transformative innovation policy, on the complexity of combining different initiatives, or on the context of transformative innovation policy in a national innovation policy mix. So I prepared slides on how analysis of these 3 levels could look like, and I will just briefly show them to you. So if we look at initiatives individually, I think this was also already part of Thiago's presentation. We can look at the instruments that are linked to them, at the target groups, and also at the budgets of these initiatives. So there are many important elements of information in there. These initiatives can also be linked to several survey questions, so we can see what topics are more familiar in the innovation policy mix with transformative innovation policy than others. And there are also URLs and free text descriptions. Now looking at combinations, if we look at all the German initiatives on green energy transformation, for example, we can see that some instruments are much more prominent than others. That this could be a starting point to consider whether initiatives are complementary, whether they reinforce or undermine each other. And this is some research that I did where I used natural, not national, but natural language processing in order to bring the whole data set into view. Here, I analyzed all the free text on all the policy initiatives in the STIP Compass and identified some key topics in there. And while the output that you see here is slightly cryptic, what we can see is that there are at least 3 topics pervading the STIP Compass that relate quite clearly to transformation. And this kind of analysis would allow us to situate transformative innovation policy in the context of the whole innovation policy mix. And here we can see that these 3 topics tend to be a bit more closer to those topics. Well, to the left of the figure, to the bottom, you see words like research, science, higher education, and these transformative topics tend to be closer to those ones than to the topics at the lower right of the figure, which are more close to business and speak about R&D, tax incentives, and other topics. So I think the STIP Compass is really a new approach to the main unit of analysis of innovation policy studies. And there are many interesting research questions we could ask using it, but I think that I should not use much more time because it would be nice to have more time to discuss the STIP Compass. Maybe one last point that I listed here, and which is quite interesting, I think, is that depending on how the STIP Compass is structured, depending on the questions that are being asked, other kinds of transformative innovation policies become easier to analyze for the users of the STIP Compass. And in that sense, it's a very interesting question to wonder, well, what does it mean to analyze transformative innovation policy through that survey, through specific survey questions, and how should we deal with the definitions implicitly put forward of transformative innovation policy by the survey? Anyway, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, David, particularly for being very fast there as well and raising some very interesting questions and giving nice insights as well on the sorts of analytical possibilities that exist for the STIP Compass. So that's all of the presentations. We have about 13 minutes left now for questions. There's a question from Johan Scott in the chat, which I can answer in a moment. But if there are any other questions, do feel free to either put them in the chat or raise your hand, because we're here in the Zoom environment, so it is possible also to raise hands and ask questions directly to any of the speakers or to all of the speakers if you prefer. So the one question that's in the chat refers to whether the STIP Compass collects information on impacts or outputs and impacts of policies, if I understand the question correctly. And currently it doesn't actually. So it's only collecting information on the initiatives as they are announced and recorded, but by countries. We don't ask them to give any sort of assessment of whether the policy has succeeded in any particular way, or whether there are any particular challenges in implementing the policy. What we do is ask them to point us to any evaluations that have been done of the policy, and to give us the URL for those. And we pass that information on then to colleagues in Fraunhofer, in the RESIS network, who are maintaining a database called RESIS, called CYPER, which is a database of evaluations. So they then take that information and they map the evaluations that have been done of policies. And what we'd like to do, which we haven't quite got around to doing yet, is to link the data that's in the CYPER database hosted at Fraunhofer back to the STIP Compass. Now, that may not be the perfect solution. It's one that we implement at the moment because it's the easiest and a low cost one. But in the future, and this is something we'd need to discuss with our member countries, with the national contact points, is options for trying to get a handle on some of the impacts of these policies and what their outputs are. So that's, I hope, answered that question. But I don't know whether there are any other questions. I don't see any other hands raised, but I have a couple of questions. But maybe before I ask the questions, I don't know whether the panel have questions for one another. Okay.
I do have a question for David. I'm curious about the natural language processing part. Should I raise my question now?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. What exactly would you like to ask, David?
Yes. Yeah. So the natural language processing that you have done, did you see any like a trend or you? I guess you compare. Did you study STIP Compass only for this edition, or did you compare with the previous ones? So whether there are any new topics that have emerged compared to the previous version, because STIP Compass is updated. It can be updated continuously, but most countries, I think, update it every 2 years, like we did.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So it is a highly interesting question whether how this data set evolves over time and what's the variation in the different topics coming up there. I didn't include that in my analysis yet because it's difficult to construct a time series, a data set for time series analysis from the STIP Compass for now. The information on when policy initiatives start and end is not always there. More frequently, we have information on when they start compared to when they end. But it's in a way, it's difficult to do this. But I think in the future, it will become easier as the data set grows. And yeah, so I hope that I can do this analysis in the future.
If I can just add to that, we had an intern from SPRU work with us over the summer last year, and she built policy histories, as we called them, for 3 countries going back to 2000. She focused on Canada, Germany, and Korea. So she worked closely with delegates in those 3 countries and with experts to try and map their policy histories, and also using previous databases like TrendChart, for example, where there is data for most European countries going back to around 2000, and as well as earlier data that we and the Commission had collected in other projects as well. This was really a huge amount of work, as you can imagine. She collected information on about 500 policy initiatives per country. She tried to look at some of the patterns across there, and of course, because there's no alignment of the taxonomies, so this makes things a little bit difficult. So she used some natural language processing, but not particularly sophisticated, because she ran out of time in the end after doing all this mapping. But I think there are possibilities there if we could collect the data and link it together, and then I think we will probably need to rely upon tools like natural language processing, though, because of the misalignment of the taxonomies, in order to get much sense at the data. I see that Klaus now has his hand raised. Klaus, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, actually, my question is, how do you see the follow-up and the change from the Frascati manual in the 1970s with the first set of STI indicators to what we call now STIP, and the relation to other initiatives, like, for example, at the European level, there was something like an initiative towards achieving a transition index to what you call now STIP. But all these activities are more or less political activities, because all the actors have to decide and to negotiate which group of indicators they want to have. Where do you stand with this sort of, would call it harmonization or homologation process for this?
Okay, let me give a quick answer, and then maybe others may want to jump in here as well. But first of all, I mean, I'm not responsible for the data, for the indicator side of the OECD. I have colleagues that work on that, but I know that this is a big preoccupation of theirs. We have a working party called NESTI, the National Experts for Science, Technology, Innovation Indicators, which has been around for a long time, for more than 60 years, and publishes Frascati and Oslo manuals. And they have a project where they're looking at indicator needs for transformative innovation policy. This is under the umbrella of a new project we have in the OECD called S&T Policy 2025, which there is another session in this conference on Friday about. So if you want to know more about that, you can listen in there. But you raise a broader, interesting question that also applies to the STIP Compass about that agreement between different countries on how to describe things and characterize things. And Priya mentioned in her presentation that that there's a sort of OECD taxonomy that's imposed on them for the sake of having harmonious data, which they use, but doesn't quite satisfy the way they may want to describe themselves and their policies. One of the things that we will be doing in this project, I think over the next couple of years, is revisiting the taxonomies and doing that in a much more inclusive way, because while the taxonomies were signed off by the committee, most of the work was done actually inside the OECD Secretariat with the European Commission. But I think we now need to open this up, and I think, Tiago has his hand up as well. He could probably also tell you about some of the issues that they face in trying to collect data that's actually harmonious, even within the country. So let me stop there, because Tiago, you have your hand up.
Yes, just it was just a brief comment, more in the sense that I think one of the also relevance of considering the STIP Compass here in this context of its contribution towards the transformative innovation policy approaches is also that some kind of a defocus from a greater priority to the kind of the indicator approach versus an approach that tries to give greater visibility and greater availability of information regarding content specifically, and the differences in terms of policy approaches between countries. And I think so, for example, although on my presentation I did end up also making up some indicators based on the numbers of policy initiatives, I think it still has a kind of a more content dimension related to the initiatives. And so this kind of, although of course as Priya mentioned and Michael, there is a kind of a fixed ontology. I think it still addresses some major differences in terms of the organization of policies. And I think that's also interesting from the policymaker perspective, in the sense that it also makes us think about our own initiatives in the extent to which they correspond to these or those objectives, these are those types of target audiences or types of categories of instruments. And so I think in that sense, I think it also induces some internal reflection by that process, and that's also why I also wanted to highlight kind of the back office dimension in terms of inputting information, collecting information, and interacting with other organizations in terms of identifying the relevant policy initiatives.
Yeah, thanks. I think that back office function is really important, and one that's rather hidden in the Secretariat, but that sort of structuring within government using STIP Compass as a sort of artifact around which you're able to do some of that structuring work, I think is something which we probably need to appreciate a little bit more, and even design some of our processes in a better way to exploit those more. We only have about 1.5 minutes left. I don't see any other questions. So could I just ask each of you just to have a final word on the kind of final takeaway on where you see STIP Compass, with one message or one or two messages where you see STIP Compass could do something different to satisfy a sort of transformative innovation policy agenda. Now, some of you have made some comments already, and you want to reinforce those, you can, but Tiago, do you want to go first and give us one or two recommendations?
Just one point is also about making greater use or valorizing the kind of the open-ended questions that the countries provide. And I think there may be some work there that can be done with NLP or other kind of word analysis dimensions. And I think so. And the second point is only about impact, which of course is the greater challenge.
Okay, from Priya.
I think if we look at the number of people who use STIP Compass, it's still a little bit low. Maybe more marketing to policymakers and also to those outside the STI community might make it more visible. And I would say searchability of the keywords in search engines. That is also important to attract hits on the STIP Compass.
Okay, thank you, Priya. And David, final word.
Very swiftly. Well, I think the spatial aspects of policies matter a lot, especially in the transformative concept. I have read that quite frequently in many papers. And so that's a question for me, like how does the STIP Compass reflect that some policies are national in scope, others are regional or local in scope?
Okay, all right. So thank you very much. And thank you to our audience for staying on and listening to these presentations. They were very, very nice presentations from speakers and giving us some great insights on how STIP Compass is used in different parts of the world and by different types of communities. And I encourage the audience, please do have a look at the platform. If you have comments and suggestions on how we can improve, there is a web address there on the platform quite prominently where you can send those suggestions. So thank you again to speakers and to the audience. And with that, I close the session. Thank you very much.
We have this networking session in the evening.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.